In part three of our look at Reconstruction, we're going to focus on the economic aspects of it. As we've already said, the South was absolutely devastated at the end of the war. It was physically damaged. The planters had lost a lot of their wealth, which was in the form of slaves. The slaves were without a way to make a living. Somehow they had to try to put the pieces together. Well, they had two resources they could begin with. One was land and the other was labor. The land was still there, and there was a large workforce, primarily of African Americans, who were able to work the land. The question was how to put the two together. Those with land had no ability to pay workers for the most part, and those who could provide the labor didn't have the land to work on. So how are you going to make an economy out of this? Well, the solution, such as it was sharecropping. And this system united landowners who had no workers and workers who had no land. Now, the sharecropping system was one of extreme hardships, and we'll talk about how and why that worked. In a sharecropping arrangement, the freedmen signed contracts, leases. They received the use of the land. They got access to some farm implements, tools, maybe a mule, and a degree of freedom. But underline the word degree here. Their freedom was really very limited. The landowners received labor without paying for it, and they got a share of the crop. Most often 50%, but sometimes it could go as high as even 75%. So the landowners got at least half and often more of the crop without actually doing the labor to produce it. Now, there were all kinds of problems with sharecropping. If you were a sharecropper, you didn't get paid until harvest time. You were paid in the form of keeping a portion of the crops that you had grown. But you had to live until then. You needed money in the spring for seed, for food, etc., to get you through the growing season. Now, in order to get this, you had to borrow it. Now, where did you go to borrow it? Well, very often to a country store. Some of these stores were set up by investors from the north. Often there would be only one store in a particular area. And of course, these sharecroppers had no decent means of transportation. So they were pretty much stuck with the store nearby. Now, these country stores would advance, in other words, loan the sharecroppers food and seed and whatever else they needed to survive until the harvest came in. Now, here's where the exploitation comes in. They charged high prices, first of all. They didn't have a lot of competition, so the sharecroppers were left without any decent options. They also charged very high interest. The average, historians have found, was around 60% per year. This is an outrageous level of interest. And on top of that, they would often cheat on record keeping. And the customers were usually illiterate. Of course, the law had said they could not learn to read under slavery, and these southern states were certainly not interested in providing education for them. So they were at an enormous disadvantage, which meant that they fell into debt and never got out of debt. That was the most common pattern. Now, what you might call the tyranny of cotton comes into play here. Farmers and country store owners demanded that sharecroppers plant cotton. If they wouldn't do that, then they couldn't get access to the land and they couldn't get the seed and food that they needed from the country stores. So they had no choice. They had to plant cotton. Now, the landowners and store owners did this because cotton was not perishable. It wouldn't spoil. So they could wait for the price to be more favorable and then sell it in ways that served their own interests. Sometimes they imposed leases on the sharecroppers that prohibited them even from planting gardens. Why did they do this? So that they had to buy their food from the store at these high prices. Now, one of the problems with cotton is it exhausts the soil very quickly. There was also more and more competition on the world market. Uh, Britain which was a major buyer of American cotton, um, was buying a lot of it from India and Egypt, both of which were in the British Empire. So the price of cotton fell steadily over the late 19th century. Now, what was the result of all this? Well, sharecroppers fell further and further into debt. Um, and this is where it gets really nasty. Southern laws allowed for imprisonment for debt. In other words, if you couldn't pay your debts, you would be sent to debtor's prison. Now, in order to uh, make sure that the debts would be paid, there were also laws against leaving the county until the debt was paid off. But of course, it could never be paid off. To make matters even worse, some prisons, to help pay for their costs of housing and feeding the prisoners, would hire out some of these prisoners to landowners nearby. Now, some of these just happened to be the slaves' old masters. So if you fell into debt, you could, and in some cases were, hired out to your old master while you were a prisoner, so you were not legally free to leave, and you would have to work to pay off the debt for your old master. Now, does this sound like slavery? It certainly seemed like it to them. Um, Now, clearly, the intent of the white South was to continue the system of slavery under another name. These were small towns, so there was a lot of winking and, backroom dealing going on. The jailers would be close to the landowners, and this was an extremely corrupt and exploitive system. Uh, to make matters even worse, there was an economic depression in southern agriculture. It lasted well into the 20th century. It affected poor whites also, and eventually this led to one of the major migrations in American history, what is known as the Great Migration of Southerners, black but also white, to the north during and after World War I. We'll talk about the Great Migration later on in the course in another context. Now, as a result of this very poor Southern economy, there were signs of what you could call class solidarity. In other words, both black and white poor people were allying in some cases against the rich. This shows up in the populist movement of the 1890s. Now, wealthy white Southerners started a system to combat this. They didn't want it to be defined as poor versus rich. So they preferred to define it as black versus white because that meant they were in a majority. And they could somehow con poor whites into being on their side and not on the side of their fellow poor citizens who were black. This was one of the major causes of what was called the Jim Crow system, a system of legal segregation. That, again, is a topic in itself that we will discuss at another time. The purpose here clearly was to divide society along lines of race. If you remember from the colonial period, the very same pattern showed up in the late 17th century after Bacon's Rebellion. Now, how does the story of Reconstruction come to an end? Well, it's not a happy story. Northern voters grew increasingly tired of Reconstruction. They didn't want to hear about the problems of the freedmen. They were moving on to other concerns. The Republicans had relied on Southern support because of black voters in the South. But they found that in the presidential election of 1872, they did very well. They won by a landslide. Ulysses Grant was reelected, and they decided that they didn't need black Southern votes so much, and they wanted to solidify their base in the North, and they preferred to focus on other issues, which is all leading to the fact that they are going to abandon the interests of the freedmen. Uh, the end of Reconstruction comes with the election of 1876. It was very close uh, between the Republican Rutherford Hayes and the Democrat Samuel Tilden. Uh, there were charges of voter fraud, um, and finally it was resolved only by a deal. Democrats and Republicans agreed that Republicans, in the person of Rutherford Hayes, would get the presidency, but Democrats, in return, would get an end to Reconstruction. So in 1877, and what's known as the Compromise of 1877, the North left Southern state governments alone. The Union Army left the South, those areas where it was still present. Reconstruction was over. And the South had a term for this. They called it redemption. Um, what this did was open the door for white Southerners to regain complete political and economic control of their region, and the losers in all of this would be African Americans.